All right, we're going to be in Isaiah 24. We've been working our way through Isaiah, of course, and the last several chapters have been primarily prophecies about historical events that were going to occur in short order and that reflected or referred to or were types and preparations for long-term historical events. Chapter 24 is primarily end times prophecies. We're not going to get that far in it, I don't think, but we're going to cover some ground. So we'll start by reading the first 12 verses of chapter 24, and then we'll go through it. So first, behold, the Lord maketh the earth empty, and maketh it waste, and turneth it upside down, and scattereth abroad the inhabitants thereof. And it shall be, as with the people, so with the priest, as with the servant, so with his master, as with the maid, so with her mistress, as with the buyer, so with the seller, as with the lender, so with the borrower, as with the taker of usury, so with the giver of usury to him. The land shall be utterly emptied and utterly spoiled, for the Lord hath spoken this word. The earth mourneth and fadeth away. The world languisheth and fadeth away. The haughty people of the earth do languish. The earth also is defiled under the inhabitants thereof, because they have transgressed the laws, changed the ordinance, broken the everlasting covenant. Therefore hath the curse devoured the earth, and they that dwell therein are desolate. Therefore the inhabitants of the earth are burned, and few men left. The new wine mourneth, the vine languisheth, all the merry-hearted do sigh. The mirth of tabrets ceaseth, the noise of them that rejoice endeth. The joy of the harp ceaseth. They shall not drink wine with a song, strong drink shall be bitter to them that drink it. The city of confusion is broken down, every house is shut up, that no man may come in. There is a crying for wine in the streets, all joy is darkened, the mirth of the land is gone, in the city is left desolation, and the gate is smitten with destruction. Now, most people see this as a prophecy dealing primarily with Israel. Certainly Israel's included, but it seems obvious to me just from the plain language of it that it's referring to the entire planet. It opens with, behold, the Lord maketh the earth empty. The earth. Okay? And so the description here is one of the kind of judgment we have not seen. Right? This has not happened yet. Look here, it says, look at verse 6. Therefore hath the curse devoured the earth, and they that dwell therein are desolate. Therefore the inhabitants of the earth are burned, and few men left. Well, that hasn't happened. Okay, these are not events that have occurred yet. Now, if you read through the book of Revelation, you'll see a series of judgments that are poured out on the earth. This, to me, is obviously referring to that. Okay? There's nothing else in the Bible other than the flood, and the flood's already happened. There's nothing else in the Bible that could produce this kind of result. But even the flood, this wouldn't describe, because the flood killed everybody and destroyed everything except 8 people. Right, plus there weren't people to languish. There was no one languishing. To languish means to lay down in weakness and despair. Okay, that wasn't happening. Everyone was dead. Okay? So this describes something that has not yet occurred, but it's going to occur. And this is really a description of God punishing primarily the Gentile world during the tribulation. That's what this is aimed at. Seems clear to me. It expands it to the entire earth. Now, why the earth? Well, because men have disobeyed God. That's why. And they know they have. Okay? So, starting at the first, says, the Lord maketh the earth empty, and maketh it waste, and turneth it upside down, and scattereth abroad the inhabitants thereof. Now, if you read again through those prophecies in the book of Revelation, you will see that through the course of those 7 years, 6 out of 7 human beings on earth die. Whoever's left after the rapture, we don't know how many people that will be because we don't know when it's going to occur. We don't know what's going to happen before it. But there are 8 billion people on the earth now. And assuming the rapture takes a few million, which I think is probably a rational number, you're talking about the deaths of 6.7 or 6.8 billion people. Okay, that fits this description, right? And in the book of Revelation, it talks about a variety of things, including a scorching. I think at 2 different places that happens, including a variety of plagues, including the death of a third of the waters, meaning that the waters are deadly. You can't drink them or use them. A third of the fish of the sea die. And imagine what that's going to be like. There's an earthquake, at least one, there's probably more, but there's at least one that shakes the entire globe and moves every island out of its place. I mean, the world has never seen anything like what's going to happen, okay? And it will produce these kinds of results. We've talked about this before. Our present world, the technology we use and the systems that we rely on, those will be utterly destroyed. They just simply will not exist anymore. Okay? Now, most of the bad things happen before the 3.5 years are up. Okay? But the real physical destructive stuff on the earth occurs after that. By the time you get to the end of the 7 years, there will be no cell phones. There'll be nothing for them to communicate with. There will be no fuel lines. An earthquake that moves every island out of its place, what is that going to do to every electronic transmission line, to every fuel line, to every highway, to every railroad? What's that going to do? And do you think these people, with everyone dying, 6 out of 7 people dying over the course of, you think they're going to fix any of that? It's all going to break down. It's going to be an absolute disaster that we can't even imagine. And he talks in verse 2, he describes how it's going to be with the poor. That's how it's going to be with the wealthy or the masters or the leaders. Everyone's going to suffer. There will be no exceptions. Okay? Usually in large disasters, that's the way it is. Everyone suffers, right? If a major tornado goes through Kansas City, it does not care if you're wealthy or not, does it? Okay, and if a hurricane hits New Orleans, which one did, if you guys remember, does it care whether the people on the receiving end of that have money or not? It does not care one bit. You drown just as easily as the next guy. Okay, now, it is true in the world as we stand now, the follow-up to a disaster goes better for the wealthy. They have money they can fall back on. They can rebuild, right? And the poor can't. They're just out. In this series of disasters, there will be no rebuilding. No one's coming back from it. Okay. Verse 3, the land shall be utterly emptied and utterly spoiled. For the Lord has spoken this word. Now, most people, when they see the phrase the land in the Bible, they, most of the time it is referring to Israel. Right? The land. But in this context, where it starts with the Lord maketh the earth empty and describes all of this destruction, that's just talking, I believe, about the ground on the whole planet. And again, if you read through the sections in the tribulation, you'll see every green thing dies. Just think about that. The little disruptions we've seen in supply chains, they're nothing compared to what's going to happen. There will be no grocery stores. There will be no truckers. None of that will be working. People are going to die in absolute droves. The earth mourneth and fadeth away. The world languisheth and fadeth away. So the earth is, of course, the physical portion of it. The world is the system. Okay? The Bible sometimes uses the word world to refer to the earth itself. You have to look at context. Here it's clearly not talking about that because it's just talked about that. So it's talking about the world system, the way people interact, the way we buy and sell, the way we own property and all that kind of thing, all around the world. That whole system, which is run by who? Anyone? Satan, prince of the power of the air, the god of this world. That word world there doesn't mean, it's not talking about the globe or the earth. It's talking about the system people live within. Okay? That whole system is going to break. It's not going to be operating anymore. And it says, the haughty people of the earth do languish. They drop down in despair because what can they do? For all their wealth, for all their self-perceived authority and power, they're helpless. They're as helpless as anyone else. And that is the point. That's what God is trying to get across to people. In Revelation, it tells us that despite the suffering of men, they will not repent. They curse God for it instead of repenting. Okay? And so God's purpose is to teach everybody that you need Him. Now, if you're a believer, you already know this. At least you know it intellectually. You need God, right? Every believer knows that. We cannot get through this life, this world on our own. We just cannot. There are too many things that are beyond us, things we cannot control, right? You cannot control your health. You can do things to help your health. You can do things to make it better. But the reality is you cannot control your health. You cannot control whether you're going to contract a disease. You just can't. Okay? You can't control your job. You can't control your income. There are just too many things that we cannot control. You can't control the fate of your loved ones. Every parent on earth would like to do that, right? We would like to dictate exactly how our children's lives are going to turn out so that it's all good. But we can't control even the slightest bit of it. Because every human being has their own will and will make their own choices. And it will either go well or it will not based on the choices they make. You should raise them to make the right choices and teach them. But the fact is, they're going to decide. You are not. And it is very depressing sometimes. Shouldn't be, because it is what it is. God knows, right? We can control nothing. We can't even control the breath we take. Okay? And so we know that, but most of the world does not. Most of the world believes that the things they have, they got them. They earned it. I did this with my own right hand, right? You see that phrase in the Bible several times. But do you not think that Bill Gates believes that about himself? I'm sure he does. I did this. I earned this money. Well, Bill definitely worked, and he did things to earn money. A lot of money. I mean, he came up with things that mattered and changed the world and are valuable. He did do that, right? But who gave him the ability to do that first? God. And who made sure he's lived to reap any of the benefits of it? Who made sure that none of that was taken away from him by a government that would actually break up a monopoly like it's supposed to do, but hasn't? Okay, so did Bill really do all that? I mean, no, he's like everyone else, but he doesn't understand that. He does not believe that. Okay, that's who the haughty are here. They are going to be humbled. They may not accept the humbling, but they're going to be humbled. In verse 5, it says, the earth also is defiled under the inhabitants thereof, because they have transgressed the laws, changed the ordinance, broken the everlasting covenant. Now, most people, when they read that, they immediately think of the Jewish covenant, right? That's what everyone thinks of. But that's not what this is talking about. I am as certain as I can be. This is not talking about the covenant that God had with Israel at Sinai. First off, this is addressed to the whole earth. It's not addressed to Israel. So this is a different covenant. Now, notice first, it says, the earth also is defiled under the inhabitants thereof. You remember in, I think it was after Manasseh, Josiah came along, King Josiah, and God put off judgment for Israel, right? Because Josiah was a good king. But do you remember what he told them? He said, but judgment is still coming, because the blood of the victims of murder, the blood of the murdered, cries to me from the ground. That's defiling your land. That's what that's about. How do you defile your land? Well, you do it by not executing murderers. That's how you do it. Is there anywhere on the planet where murderers get executed consistently? I don't think there is. I mean, maybe in a place like Iran or Russia, but they got to catch them, right? And they're not real good at that. We're not good at it anymore here either. We used to be. I saw that the clearance rate for murders in New York City was under 20% now, and has been for years. That means 4 out of 5 murders go unsolved. No idea who did that. So, and then when we do catch somebody, we cannot bring ourselves to actually execute them. We have trials, everyone weeps about the poor man's childhood and how badly he was treated. I'm sure that's all true. Well, I'm not always sure, but sometimes it's true. Not that that makes any difference. It's what we talked about earlier. You can raise your children perfectly and teach them everything. You're not going to because you're a sinner. But you could and teach them everything right. They're still going to decide themselves what they're going to do. And the murderer does that too. Many people have been raised in terrible childhood conditions and come out and been fantastic adults. Okay? I'm married to one. Her childhood was a nightmare. But she has never let that be an excuse or hold her back. Okay, so people decide. This person decided to murder, and we just can't bring ourselves to execute the man. We had that recent guy that we tried to execute here in Idaho, couldn't find a vein, so we just gave up. What in the world is going on? I don't even know what to do with that. Well, if you're not going to execute murderers, the blood of their victims is going to cry from the ground, and that defiles your land. God said the land of Israel was defiled by that, and that's why judgment was going to be brought despite Josiah's reformation. So clearly that's what he's talking about here. Now in this country, it's not just actual legal murderers that we have a problem with. We have abortionists and mothers killing their children. And that is murder. People can say what they want, but it is. It is murder. And God sees it as murder. We've had more than 30 million infants murdered in this country since 1973. And not a thing has been done to stop it as far as punishing murderers. Actual abortionists, right? Just because someone thinks they need an abortion, a doctor gets to kill a child. Do you think that's how God sees that? So that's what this is talking about, that kind of thing. Now, I'm focusing on the U.S., but these problems exist all over the world. The land is defiled under the inhabitants. Now, why am I talking about murder? Well, turn to Genesis 9. This is the everlasting covenant he's talking about. It's in Genesis chapter 9. It's known colloquially as the Noahic covenant. Now, Noah is the ancestor of all of us. We all know that, right? All of us descended from Noah. There's not a person on earth that didn't descend from Noah. He's the ancestor of every human being who's alive on earth. Okay? And so a covenant between him and God is between all of us and God. Not just Israel. It covers them too, but it's for everybody. This is what the Gentiles are held accountable for. So chapter 8, verse 20, Noah builded an altar unto the Lord, took of every clean beast and every clean fowl, and offered burnt offerings on the altar. That's why he took 7 of each of those instead of just 2, so he could do this at the end. And the Lord smelled a sweet savor, and the Lord said in his heart, I will not again curse the ground any more for man's sake, for the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth, neither will I again smite any more everything living as I have done. So he's never going to kill the whole planet again. He is going to wreck it, though. And then it says in verse 22, while the earth remaineth, seed time and harvest, and cold and heat, and summer and winter, and day and night shall not cease. This is why we know global warming is nonsense. Look what it says. Seed time and harvest, and cold and heat, and summer and winter. Those are just going to continue until the end. There is no such thing as climate change or global warming that creates a problem for us. God said that's not going to happen, as long as the earth remaineth. Now, at the end of the millennial kingdom, he burns up the earth and creates a new one. Okay? But until then, that'll be real global warming. But until then, we don't have to worry about that nonsense. And then in chapter 9, verse 1, and God blessed Noah and his sons, we all descended from those sons, and said unto them, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. So there's the first command. People are supposed to have children. That's the first command. What do we see in our modern world? People don't want to have kids. You know, the United States is under replacement rate, barely. It's like 1.9 children per couple, I think. And replacement rate is 2.1, right? Korea, I just saw a video on that today. They're down below 1 per couple. In 3 generations, there won't be any Koreans in Korea. I mean, you know, these trends move up and down a little bit. So, but their population is going to shrink dramatically and rapidly. Okay, so that's number one. People aren't having children. Why are they not having children? There you go. They're selfish, right? That is the reason. I know. Some people have physical disabilities or illnesses or other things and they can't have children. Well, obviously this doesn't apply to you. I'm talking about the people who choose. Okay, which is the vast majority. And the vast majority of people, they don't want to get married. They don't want to have children. If they do get married, they want to marry someone who doesn't want children so that the two of them can combine their 2 incomes and can live, you know, expensive, wealthy lives, traveling and with lots of toys. I like toys too, and so I get it, but that's what they do. Instead of committing themselves to the next generation of human beings, which is what you're supposed to be doing. I know they say, well, I'm free not to. Yeah, that's right. You can break the covenant with God, but eventually judgment comes. The next one, and the fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth, and upon every fowl of the air, upon all that moveth upon the earth, and upon all the fishes of the sea. Into your hand are they delivered. Every moving thing that liveth shall be meat for you, even as the green herb have I given you all things. Okay, so that's second. We can eat meat. Of course, there's all kinds of movements now trying to get us away from eating meat. You know, vegetarians, but whatever. But you know how people are. They see eating meat as somehow an acceptable evil or a bad thing that God just allows. That's not what the Bible says. He said here, eat meat. And we find in the New Testament that we're told to receive the meat and eat it gratefully, thankfully. And so that's another one. Look at verse 4, but flesh with the life thereof, which is the blood thereof, shall ye not eat. So, of course, we're not supposed to eat blood. And then verse 5, and surely your blood of your lives will I require. At the hand of every beast will I require it, and at the hand of man. At the hand of every man's brother will I require the life of man. Whoso sheddeth man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed, for in the image of God made he man. So there you go. This is the establishment of human government. Human government was created before this, before the flood. There was no human government. Men lived according to their conscience, did what they thought was right. Now, of course, they didn't do what they thought was right. They did what they knew was wrong, which is why they got flooded. Okay? But now God has established government to keep that from happening. And what is the purpose of government? It's to restrain man's evil against man. That's why it exists. That is really the only reason it exists. God established government so that we can protect ourselves from foreign enemies and we can catch and punish bad people who live among us. Law enforcement, national defense. Those are the purposes of government. Okay? The government does a lot of other things, but those are the real purposes. It's contained right here. If you can execute a man, can you fine him? And if you can take a man's life, if you're authorized by God to take a man's life for something, can you fine him or lock him up? Well, not for that particular thing, no, but you can for other things. If you can take a man's life, I mean, you can't do any more to him, right? It's a principle called the greater includes the lesser. If God has authorized human governments to execute murderers, then they can absolutely punish thieves and lock them up and fine them and do those kinds of things. That's how human government came about, is this command right here. It's a covenant with God. And it's with all of us. That's the purpose of government. Verse 7, and you be ye fruitful and multiply, bring forth abundantly in the earth, and multiply therein. And God spake unto Noah and to his sons with him, saying, and I, behold, I establish my covenant with you and with your seed after you. We are all the seed of Noah, And all of us are descendants of his sons. Probably everyone in this room is descended from Japheth primarily. But we're all descended of his sons. And with every living creature that is with you. And let's see. Verse 12, and God said, this is the token of the covenant, which I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you for perpetual generations. That is the everlasting covenant. Okay, and it is that he's not going to ever flood the world again. That was in verse 11. I skipped it. Verse 13, I do set my bow in the cloud, and it shall be for a token of a covenant between me and the earth. And what have we done in this country, at least, with the rainbow? Who does it belong to? Right, it's God's rainbow. It's his token of this covenant, this perpetual covenant with all mankind. And you know, the perverts and the queers have taken it and decided it's theirs. Well, it's not theirs, and our society lets them get away with it. But why do you think the land is defiled? Okay, so going back now to Isaiah chapter 24 and verse 5, the earth also is defiled under the inhabitants thereof, because they have transgressed the laws, changed the ordinance, broken the everlasting covenant. We don't bother executing murderers. We won't restrain people's vile behaviors. And as a result, the Gentile world is going to get judged. And that's what the tribulation has. Two primary purposes. It's judgment across the board, but it's a two-part judgment. One part is aimed at the Gentile world, and that is to just outright judge it as having violated God's covenant with the Gentile world, which is the Noahic covenant. The second one, because the governments don't restrain evil anymore. They promote it. Now, to be fair, they've always done that, but we've reached a point where it's way worse than it's ever been. And the use of technology has made that a much bigger problem than it used to be. Okay? Israel is also going to be judged. But their judgment is different. It's a chastisement. Their judgment's purpose is to turn Israel to the Messiah. Now, the result of that judgment on the Gentiles, which is straightforward judgment on the apostasy of the Gentile world, that will still lead to many people getting saved. Okay, the Bible tells us an uncountable multitude from every tongue and nation and blood, every tribe gets saved during the tribulation. And so these are people, of course, who have not had the opportunity to get saved before. They haven't heard a clear gospel presentation, or at least they've never understood it. But they're going to have their chance during the tribulation, and many of them are going to get saved, and they will die for it. Vast multitudes of them are in heaven before we even get to the end of the tribulation period, because they were killed for the testimony of Jesus Christ. That's what it says in Revelation, right? But that's not the purpose of that judgment. The Gentile world's not going to be reformatted or, corrected that way. It's going to be reformatted under Christ and his authority on earth, but they're all going to be under his thumb directly. In other words, Israel is going to run the world. Arabs are going to love that. It is going to happen, though. Israel will be the head, and everyone else will be the tail. Okay, now, Israel's purpose, they rejected the Messiah the first time he came, and so the purpose of their judgments is to open their eyes to that truth, turn them, and see that they're saved. Even so, 2/3 of Israel will reject him. 1/3. We just read it recently. 1/3 of Israel will be saved, which is all of Israel in Romans chapters 9, 10, and 11. That is all that God considers Israel, or those who believe. Okay? But about 1/3 of Israel will be saved, 1 out of 3. And they will turn. Nevertheless, they're going to be under immense chastening as a people. And then you can go on and see, therefore hath the curse devoured the earth, and it describes what all that means. And then it talks about the cities. The city, in verse 10, the city of confusion is broken down. So that's not Jerusalem. Confusion is what? What word does God call confusion? Babel. And Babel was the beginning of what? Babylon. You see in Revelation there's two Babylons, right, that are covered. One of them is the great whore. That's false religion, right? The other Babylon it talks about is financial Babylon or merchant Babylon. It's the world system as a whole. We just saw in the previous chapter Tyre come under judgment for being a representative of that. Okay? Both of them will be destroyed. That is confusion. That's what that's talking about. And so when it talks about the city of confusion, it's talking about Babylon, okay, which is used as a type to reflect the entire earth, the Gentile world. And then in the city is left desolation, and the gate is smitten with destruction. That system is going to be destroyed. It is not going to be rebuilt. It's just not. And I think if you look at how the governments look in the book of, or in the millennial kingdom, from what we can tell, we have limits, but what we can tell, it'll be kings everywhere. There will not be the kind of governments we see now on this earth, which will be fine because the king in Jerusalem is perfect. He makes no errors. He makes no mistakes. He knows everything. He'll pick the perfect person for each one to run each nation. And, if you have a good king, I don't like kings. I want to be clear. I like one king, but I don't like any of the others, okay? And so even David, right, murdered one of his own mighty men so he could have his wife. And he was about as good a king as has ever lived, okay? Kings are problematic. But when the king is perfect, knows all things, can do no wrong, and can see everything, knows all hearts, there'll be no tricking him. There'll be no coming to trial and explaining how you were beaten as a baby, and that's why you killed those two people. There'll be no murder either. No one is even going to get away with that. The world's going to be policed by angels and by believers in glorified bodies. So that, those kinds of things just won't happen. But God takes the intent for the act, right? Right? When talking about the kingdom, Jesus says, if you look on a woman with lust in your heart, you've committed adultery already. That's a reference to the kingdom. Now, it's true, that's how he sees all of us all the time. What's in here, okay, that's what you get judged for. What you would do if you could. A lot of people don't do things simply because the penalties involved, the risk of the penalties, is too great. But if they knew they could get away with it, they'd do it, right? Well, that's how God treats it. So he takes the intent for the act. So there will be none of this, I was so mistreated that I shouldn't be punished. Oh, no, that will not work. Christ looks through all of that. And he'll pick the perfect leadership. And so the fact that the world will be governed by various kings is really not a problem at that point. It would be a problem now, right? Because what do earthly kings look like? Well, they look like Stalin and Mao and Hitler. Kings are just dictators. You can call them whatever you want. Just because Stalin called himself the general secretary of the Communist Party didn't make him any less a king than the czar that came before him. Okay? And that's how human kings look. But when Christ is in power, there will be no Stalins. Okay, so we'll stop there. This whole section here is talking about, of course, the judgment of the Gentile world, and then we will see some shifting in the prophecies as we go forward. It's clearly talking about how God is going to bring judgment on the Gentile world for violating the Noahic covenant, and that will be fulfilled during the tribulation period. If you read Revelation, you'll see what that looks like. It's horrific. Some of the most terrifying passages I've ever seen. All right, any questions? No? Everyone got that? That's perfectly clear, right? All right, you're dismissed.
Human government doesn't usually end after the millennial kingdom.
Or during, you mean?
After.
Well, Jesus is always human. So.
Right.